Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our session this afternoon is focused on how do we make leadership more effective. We will be running the two sessions back to back, so thank you for the panelists for all joining on time at 6 o'clock. I'll start, first of all, with Mr. Mirko Nikolic. I have the pleasure to welcome an old friend and former colleague. Mirko is a business coach and mentor to senior executives of multinational corporations across different sectors and in many countries. He benefits from over 35 years as a consultant and over 25 of those as a senior partner of BCG to advise senior executives across sectors. So we very much look forward to your insights, Mirko, on leadership and how senior executives go about it.
Thank you.
So,
good introduction.
In your coaching, you link very strongly the concept of leadership and motivation.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you feel they're so closely related?
I think that motivation is at the core of leadership. Ultimately, what every executive wants is an engaged organization that will run faster, jump higher, that goes beyond what is normally expected, that feels ownership in whatever it is that they're doing. And if you want to feel ownership, you need to be engaged. And to be engaged, you need to be motivated. So it's at the very heart of leadership. What I'm particularly focused on is that I see that there are a lot of misconceptions around what motivation is really all about. There's an overemphasis today on what I call extrinsic motivation, which is basically the carrot and the stick. And the carrot and the stick really treats people like pigeons. You know, if you ring the bell, then the pigeon gets food, and then after a while, the pigeon keeps on doing what the bell is signaling. This is the old Pavlovian concept. And you see a lot of that principle in management nowadays because there's an over-reliance on rewarding based on performance indicators, with the assumption that then people run faster and jump higher. And I think we're missing a huge opportunity for engaging people in an organization, and that is driven by intrinsic motivation. Anyone that has children knows that children are intrinsically motivated, that they are curious, and that they like to self-direct. And when it goes amok is when you overly rely on extrinsic motivation. That's why I'm focusing on that so much.
So extrinsic versus intrinsic. I guess, first of all, they're not mutually exclusive.
No.
So you need to boost the intrinsic side, is what you're saying. Sounds very technical.
Yeah.
What makes up intrinsic motivation? How would you describe it in simple terms?
Okay. Well, I've given this a lot of thought, and I've looked at a lot of research that's been done on motivation, and I've basically come down to 4 key intrinsic motivators. Number 1 is a sense of purpose. So why am I doing what it is that I'm doing? Why is it meaningful? The nice thing about sense of purpose is that if you have a strong sense of purpose, you're much more tolerant when things are not always going your way. You know, take, for example, Doctors Without Borders. They have a very strong sense of purpose. They're willing to risk their lives for it. They know that the medical facilities are far from ideal, but yet they tolerate them. And they tolerate them because of this strong sense of purpose. The second intrinsic motivator that is very important is one that's called autonomy. You know, in the autonomy in giving a lot of freedom on the how, what it is that you're going to do, how you're going to do it, with whom you're going to do it, and that you just get direction on what is being expected in terms of results. The more autonomy you have, the more meaning you can put into your work, the happier you are. I think anyone in this audience that has someone looking over their shoulders saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? Why are you not doing it another way? I think that all of you then immediately think motivation goes down the tubes. The third one is what I call mastery. We all want to grow. We all want to get better at things. If you look at any top athletes, they're not primarily concerned about winning this match. They're concerned about being better. I once had the opportunity to interview Roger Federer, and when I was talking with Roger Federer, I said, are you thinking about winning Wimbledon, or are you thinking about winning the next big event? And he says, I think about that, but when I'm in the event, all I think about is there's a ball coming with top spin. This is how I need to respond. So he's just thinking about upping his game. As soon as you start thinking about winning or losing, you lose. Because what are you concerned about then? You're no longer concerned about the game, you're concerned about yourself. Will people cheer for me or will they lose? Am I going to make the money or not? And then you choke. You see this in every athlete. So mastery, working on mastery is a great energizer. And the nice thing about mastery is you never get there. It's an asymptote. And then the last one is a sense of belonging. We are all social beings. We need to be appreciated. We need to be recognized. We need to be rewarded in terms of recognition for what it is that we do. One of the biggest reasons that talented people leave an organization, I think it's the #1 reason, is because they don't feel recognized. Do you know that there was a Gallup study done a while back in the US, and they discovered that if people are ignored, the chances are 4 out of 10 are passively disengaged. It's passive-aggressive behavior. That's the worst thing you can have in your organization. 4 out of 10. If you are positively interested in what people are doing and you give them attention and recognition, the chances of having a passive-aggressive person in your midst is 1 in 100. 1 in 100 versus 4 out of 10. So the question for leadership is also, when you want to appeal to a sense of belonging, is, are you paying enough attention to your people? Are you truly interested in what it is that they are doing? Why should they be interested in the bigger cause if you're not interested in them? So those are the 4, what I call nutrients of intrinsic motivation. Look, if you're starving and you don't have a house above your head, of course, your primary concern is not intrinsic motivation. Your primary concern is surviving. That's the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. But most of us are not working in that kind of an environment. And that's why I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on those 4 intrinsic motivators than is currently the case.
Mirko, all these 4 are, I would say, very hard to measure, right? And managers traditionally don't like things that are hard to measure, and investing in things that are hard to measure and not tangible. So how would you say this translates into practice for managers? I mean, what would you say are examples of how people can really make this tangible and real within their leadership and management style?
I'm sure you're all familiar with lean manufacturing. This is a nice example I like to use. Basically, lean manufacturing says that the people that are executing the processes, they're the best at knowing how to improve them. And what I do very often in lean programs, I coach the executives. And what I coach them on is what not to do. Not what to do, but what not to do. When they see that things are not up to target, up to speed, like for example, there's a trajectory that's 10 weeks, and what they discover is after 1 week, we haven't finished 1/10 of the 10-week period, they get extremely nervous. And then they start sticking their nose in how to do things. And then they ask, very often, negative questions. Why are you only 1/20th of the way? Why are you not 1/10 of the way? saying, what did you do wrong? And then what the response is a defensive one, because they're being attacked and they're being criticized. A better question is, what did you learn? What can you do to speed things up? That's a very different question. And not come with the answer. So very often I'm coaching the people, even don't go into problem-solving mode. If you want to empower your people, empower them. Don't solve their problems. You solve their problems, you take away their responsibility. And then what happens is they say, okay, tell me what to do. That's not an engaged workforce. These are things you can measure also, because you can just ask people, you can do surveys about what the level of engagement is. You can do surveys on whether they feel their leaders show that they care, and there are different ways of showing that you care, and you can ask people whether they feel they're getting any of this. That's not so difficult.
Mirko, do you feel that there's a difference between so-called knowledge-based workforces and more traditional workforces, and how do these ideas play into those different fields?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I got into this stuff a bit more because I'm working primarily with knowledge-based people. I think that, I mean, if we look what's going on in the world, we see routine work is becoming less and less. You know, we're talking about artificial intelligence. We see that robots are taking over. So I heard in one of the sessions, you know, that there's a robot that does welding and can do it at a quarter of the cost that a championship welder can do. So what you're going to see is you're going to see more and more routine work being taken over by machines, or it becomes so basic that we try to find cheap labor somewhere in the world, sweatshops and what have you, that do these kinds of things. But in a knowledge economy, in a technology economy, you need engaged people that think creatively. This is what you need. With uneducated work that is routine, you can capture it with an algorithm. If you can capture it with an algorithm, yes, you can reward by saying if you drill 4 holes in an hour, you get X. If you increase it to 5, you get Y, and the performance goes up. But what we need is people that think creatively, that think out of the box, that come up with new solutions, that think heuristically, who cannot be captured in an algorithm. And this is greater in a technologically driven organization, software companies, consulting firms, for example, than it is in, let's say, an agro-business where most of the activity is plucking the tomatoes from the plants. You know, that's a different game. But I would argue that intrinsic motivation you can find in all lines of work. The very famous example was in 1963 when Kennedy went to Houston. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but Kennedy asked this guy what he was doing in this sanitized room. And he said, "Are you the janitor here? Well, what are you doing? Are you cleaning?" And he says, "I'm helping get a man on the moon." So even for something routine, he did have a sense of purpose. He understood what it was that he was doing, how that contributes. Because if you have an unsanitized capsule up there, that little bug can cause big damage. So I think that fundamentally there's no difference, but I think that in practice, what you will see is more emphasis has to be placed on that in technical companies. And what you see now also is recent research has shown that if you look at the millennial generation, what do they talk about most? They're running away from corporate life. So my turf is corporate. I work for corporations, publicly listed companies mostly. And what you see is millennials don't like all this stuff coming down on them, all this control, all these processes that are micromanaging how they behave. And so what they want is they want good work-life balance, they want meaningful work, they're interested in having an impact on society. This is what they're going for.
Thank you, Mirko. That's some incredible food for thought for our panel. To summarize, make sure people are part of the vision.
Yep.
We give them more autonomy and empower them, focus on their development, and really feel they belong within the total.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, and
You're welcome.
would love if you could stay and take part in the Q&A after the rest of the panel. Just please bear with us. We'll switch to Greek for a while, but you should be fine.
I have my headphones.
Thank you.